Well, welcome to another episode of HF Conversations. We're so glad that you are joining us today from wherever you are in the world. I have Pastor Mark here with me, and today we want to have a conversation kind of based around a sermon that you did recently for our At the Movies series. So during the month of July, we took each Sunday and kind of themed a message with a different speaker around a movie. We did some old movies, some new movies, and Mark did a new movie that came out this year called Ready Player One. And so why don't you just kind of talk about what you pulled from that movie and kind of where you kind of landed with some of that.
Yeah. So the big idea was we connected with this of people becoming disillusioned with reality to the point in which they desired to really spend more time in the oasis in an alternate reality than actual reality. That's the biggest connection point that I made with that, just because as soon as I saw those things either in the book or in reviews about the movie first, that was the first thought that I had, was just like, absolutely, that's where I think we are right now. It's just not in the same dramatic way as it is in the movie, obviously, and not so much of just the game part of what the movie became, what that looked like, but just that we become disillusioned with reality, either through being idealistic or just cynical about reality. Either we take off, we have dreams, and we discover that leads us to disappointment, or we just start off, we think everything's going to be bad, and it leads us to exactly what we expect. We find all of the bad that's in the world, and it leads us to this place of disillusionment that then causes us to try to find a way to escape. And so, we're just looking at all that, trying to connect
just a little few things.
Yeah.
I love the book Ready Player One, and I found it was incredible because the guy that wrote that book wrote it in 2011.
Yeah.
So like VR and Oculus Rift and all that had sort of barely begun.
Yes.
It was in its early stages, and he imagines this world, and you can look at some of the recent technology that's come out where Facebook buys Oculus and has a new $200 VR headset that you can wear. This is becoming a reality.
Yes,
not
already.
just in a theory, right? But
already.
We're a year, 2 years away from really similar experiences. So I did find it was interesting just how much of a cultural critique it is and how kind of forward-thinking it was. But I do think that beyond just actually being in a VR world, we live in such a digital world where so much of our person is put into that, right? Whether it's social media, on Instagram or whatever. We care so much about the digital. It matters so much. So, whether we're actually in VR, if you watch the movie and you're like, well, I don't have a VR world. I don't live in that. It's but maybe you are disconnected from the world around you. Yeah, because one of the lines that we pulled from the movie that we talked about the most was, people go there because of what they can do, but they stay there because of what they can be. I thought that was one of the most profound things from that. Is that's exactly what happens with all these things in our current digital world and context, is that most of us are there because they're just helpful things, right? That helps us be able to do what we need to do. That's right. More efficiently. And so that's really where it all starts. We'll be able to stay in contact with people. We'll be able to pay our bills. We'll be able to keep our schedule. It helps in a ton of ways, right? So we get there because of, hey, this will help. It will help us do something. And then we get there, and then we stay there because, wait, I can create whatever I want to become, or give the appearance that I can be whatever I want to be. And probably one of the neat things in the book or the movie is this, underneath it all, when you kind of get to the end of some of that, is, hey, I would really rather know you guys in real life. Was kind of one part of that in the movie that I didn't talk about in the message part so much, is that still even in that, where it becomes that much better than reality, the alternate reality, the VR world becomes that much better than reality. It's still kind of I would probably rather just know you outside of that world. And and I think that's where we are. So I love being able to connect the dots. There are so many things in that I think that we're just where we are. Yeah. So you talked about the movie and about sort of that reality of virtual reality versus reality, and then you kind of moved into a cultural criticism, kind of talking about what this means for us as believers, as the church, and as people with souls. So maybe we can just kind of dive a little deeper into some of those themes. And
yes. Yeah. So I talked about probably as many different subjects as possible in the opening 7 or 8 minutes
Yeah, it was
of
fast.
this, and a lot of stuff, and kind of just spewed out a lot of things to be able to talk about this generational moment and what is creating this sense of disillusionment that we have. And and so I get there's like so many things there to be able to wrestle with, but the reason why I wanted to wrestle with all of those things, one is just so that the people listening in could observe me wrestling with it as much as anything. Because what I wanted to be able to do is talk about the things that are happening in reality. I want to be able to talk about this movie, this book, those things like that that are popular in culture, and help do something that I talked a little bit about, which is cultural exegesis, which is being able to read into culture, things that are happening, events that are happening, movies, books, things in media like that, read into that and then interpret what's underneath that. Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
And so it's the difference between like weather and climate, where understanding a bigger picture of we live in a climate that's the rainforest versus just today it rained a lot, right?
Yeah. Like,
And
well, it's raining, so right, you don't actually live in the rainforest,
right? Right, and so that's some complicated ways of just trying to help people understand. Nothing happens in a vacuum. There's a context in which these individual events are happening in. And so without understanding context and without reading into culture and interpreting what culture is saying, it's very difficult to understand all of that. And so I'm always doing that with the attempt of, underneath all of that, there's always some message of this is what the good life is, or this is what is wrong with life. Every one of those messages kind of pushes in one of those ways. This is what's so bad about the world. This is what's wrong. And then oftentimes, here's really what good would look like, though. And from a biblical standpoint, that's where we need to really be equipped to be able to look at that and say, does that, where's the space for the gospel, the good news about Jesus, to be able to step into that?
Yeah, it's the way that we read the Bible, the way that we interact with the Bible. It's so easy, and you and I have had this conversation so many times about how that just as we look at culture outside that's not in a vacuum, the Bible is also written in a culture and a climate.
Yes.
And there are things in it that we have to look at. And so you actually mentioned that in a pretty fun way. So we can roll through that.
So this was one of the hardest things to try to be able to do, because I wanted to almost illustrate what we do within the church that makes that sometimes worse.
Yeah.
Like how we actually just add to disillusionment, and how we actually create additional disillusionment inside the church for people. And there's actually entire studies that's looking at the anxiety created inside religious and spiritual circles. Wow. That is actually just laying like a heavier weight onto people because they expect something that is not happening, and they can't figure out why. Sure. That's what's wrong. So obviously it's something wrong with me. And so one of the things that I did was I'm talking about this generational moment that we're in right now, and then I'm going back to Jeremiah in the Old Testament, and I wanted to do that from a couple different vantage points. One is I hear all the time, like in the Christian community, about the world is changing, the world is so bad, we're in this postmodern, post-Christian, post-truth culture, and so how are we ever going to be able to find God in this generation and in future generations? We're just not going to be able to do that. And I went to Jeremiah to be able to also point out, in the middle of that story, they're in exile, but it's in exile when they're in unfamiliar place, unfamiliar culture, definitely not an emphasis on God in culture, but the opposite of that. But in the middle of all of that, God is saying to them, seek me, you'll find me. Yeah. And I think like it's so easy to miss that. That was a revolutionary thought, is that no, I have to be actually close to home and close proximity to temple religious worship practices, all those kind of things. Yeah. That's where the value was. And then kind of take that and work into the modern context as well as what we've done with that.
Yeah.
Is we've pulled out like Jeremiah 29:11 and just said, God has a
I know
plan.
the plans.
Plan to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. It's great.
It's every valedictorian speech.
Yeah, it's great.
Wedding or whatever
and,
event. Yeah.
Yeah, and and a lot of people have that memorized, and there's a lot of value in that, and I love that, and I wanted to try to in the talk even to say this is true, right? Like I get this, but when we take this out of context, here's what winds up happening: we develop this cookie cutter Christianity that is based on these little things that we pick and choose and we take out of context and we pull them into a conversation like this. And then what winds up happening is that we get into a complex world and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, I can't just look at my life and be like, oh, well, there's a plan, it seems, and there's it helps for sure for me to understand Jeremiah's context. All that I'd hoped for, I've lost. But God has a plan, a hope, and a future. That's a different weight to that. And he insists on what God is saying to him, like it's God declared to them, if you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me.
Yeah.
Like there's this invitation to seeking God that I think that they didn't expect. Yeah. And I think it's the same thing in this cultural moment for the church, who maybe has been thinking what we need most is for culture to be familiar to us.
Yeah.
What we need most is for culture to kind of align with us in some kind of way, or be like maybe what it used to be, whatever that really means, And we can actually miss that. Guys, like no, like in the unfamiliar place, you can actually see my face more clearly.
Yeah.
You get to these places like this, and I'm inviting you, seek me, you'll find me, even here.
Yeah.
Or maybe even especially here.
Yeah, maybe that's when you do need that the most.
Yeah.
That God is faithful. When everything is good, like you don't need that provision in the same way as when it's a struggle. I think for so many people, they experience that cookie cutter sort of Christianity, like, cross-stitch verse like that. And it's unsustainable to the weight of loss and of grief and of sadness. And like, you can't imagine those things as a child. And so when your faith doesn't grow with you in those difficulties, and you see that, the Bible is like one of the only books that was written from the people who didn't win, right?
Yeah.
The people who keep going to exile, who keep failing, who keep getting lost in the wilderness and stuck. And, in the New Testament, we see people who, they don't overthrow Rome.
No,
they don't overthrow the empire.
No,
this isn't Star Wars. As much as you want it to be, and you see that even in just the difficulty of the reality of Jesus, who is this king who doesn't overthrow the government, but allows himself to be killed by the government, right?
Yes.
Like that's not what people wanted.
No.
So that's not what we want. Is to go to exile. We want to have control. Which is natural, but I mentioned this to some of our online people the other day, which was, what does it look like for us to actually love our neighbor? And then how can we love our enemy? Because we can't even love our neighbor. So imagine, how do we love people that hate us, right? Our enemy.
Yeah.
We can't love our cousin on Facebook who we don't agree with. This is hard stuff, right?
It is.
It on one hand, loving other people sounds easy.
Yeah.
But in reality, it can be hard. And that's what you see, I think, too, with this idea of virtual reality and the Oasis and Ready Player One, but just in social media in general, is that you just get to skim over the good stuff. And if you don't like it, you can just unfollow or block or mute.
Yeah.
But in real life, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And so you get kind of stuck in a difficult place.
True.
But in that place is where we can find God. Right? In that place is, for I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, not to harm you.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is an opportunity for us as the church, that regardless of any persecution or difficulty, I don't feel like really persecuted right now, but there are people obviously in the world that are experiencing that kind of difficulty. There is encouragement in that, because in that difficulty, in that rough and jagged place, like there is hope. And so to me, that is important to realize.
Yes.
Because we don't live in a perfect world.
Yeah.
Because we live in a real world.
Yeah.
You know, there is a struggle, but there is a payoff in that struggle. Even if we don't feel it immediately, which is hard, right? Like, I want to grab my phone and, you know, you can order at Starbucks before you get there and you just show up and their drink's ready. Like, it's, you know, I used to be able to just pay with my phone, but now I can just order with it, you know, and you can take an Uber to get there. Like, I mean,
I know.
we live in such a commodity world. It's difficult to really face struggle.
Yeah.
That's hard. Literally.
Yeah. And I think, like, as soon as you say that, like, the first thing that comes to my mind is that in this generational moment, at times it feels like God is one of those commodities. You know, that God becomes to us another commodity. And that we've marketed him in that way, that we have strategically tried to describe him in that way. For the sake of a number of reasons. You know, who knows what all the motives is with that. But that's why one of the things why I mentioned in this was talking about when things seem so complicated and so complex, I want to run to that which is simple. And so, like, the good news about, like, God, you know, his ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. You know, from everlasting to everlasting, he's God. Like, all that fancy stuff means we're not ever really going to fully grasp God. We're not going to come to the end of God and be like, I've got that now. I've done with that, and I figured him out. And that's why, though, I think what is so refreshing is what Jesus lays out in terms of those things that are most important. Even though there's a lot of complicated things. Those commandments of loving God with all that we have, with heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving our neighbor as ourselves. None of those are easy. None of that is natural. Those are hard in themselves, but it's simple though. Like, it is I need to run toward that which is simple in my life, and then to the point of what I was mentioning in that in the talk was, I can't just simply check mark that I am done with that. Or that
love
that's not the way that it works as far as, like, this is number one, this is what's most important. The second one is like it, this is number two. You do one, then you do two, then you do instead it's this
it's just one and
constant
two
one and two and one and two and one and two. And if you don't if you are not there with one, you're definitely not going to be there with two. But that's what I wanted to try to also help to push against this God is a commodity, instant gratification. I showed up, I went to church one time, I read my Bible one day, and now I am better and on track, and my marriage is going to fix itself, and it's all going to work. That's superstition. That's not relationship. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not faith in a loving relationship with God or with anyone. It's not how that works. That's a superstitious act.
Drive-through transaction.
So I've got the and
like, well, got the thing. Please pull forward.
And so and so I wanted to speak about those things because, again, like that, with all this disillusionment and all of those things with disappointment with reality, there's not the quick fix. We can't even just frame God in such a way to say God is the quick fix. Because how many of those conversations, because we talked about this before I gave that message, actually, that I did not want to come across in that way. I don't ever want to come across, okay, so, like, really what we need in this generational moment is Jesus.
If you just sprinkle some Jesus on it, it'll...
And it's like, well, yes, but what does it look like,
It's hard.
That's the challenge with some of those kind of things. But it looks like long-term, lifelong, long-lasting, loving relationship with God that keeps us that keeps our hearts, that protects our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus, His peace guarding us in that way is really what Paul has in mind in Philippians 4 with that. And that's what I really wanted to press in on in those kind of ways. It is so complicated, it seems at times. There's more questions than answers with a lot of things.
Yeah.
I need to run toward that which is simple and constantly be bringing that to my attention, putting that in front of me, because this is a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
Kind of thing with God.
Yeah, I think that this message that you gave, it had a great reception. I think, like in person, online, on the archives, because I think it did leave in an encouraging place of even in the difficulty. Right, there is struggle, but there is like a payoff in that too, right? Like there is reward in that sense.
Yeah.
By being faithful to that, by trusting in that process. And we're not good at trusting in the process unless it's like 3 steps and, if it lasts more than like 2 weeks, it's like really hard, and so, but the beauty of the gospel is that every day is a chance to pick up your cross and die to yourself, to pick, what does that look like? I mean, I think it looks different for different people, right?
Yeah,
what's the thing that you need to sort of, die to yourself in? Like, what does that look like? But that opportunity continues to be there. And so there's hope, because even if today was awful, right? You just felt like you were nothing, and you yelled at your kids, and you just like, were angry at people in traffic and spilled your coffee, and like it just, on your worst day, there's grace for that. And on your best day, you're not that great. Right? There's grace for that too. So we just continue to walk. We continue to strive for that in a healthy way. Right? We're not striving for popularity. We're striving to be close to that which is simple, which is good, which is God. And so, if you're listening to this or watching this and are feeling like the weight of media consumption and like all of that, like I feel that sometimes. There are seasons where I'm like, I need to get away from this. And so
absolutely.
Ever connected, always buzzing phone.
Thousands of messages making its way to your mind every single day. Most of the bad news.
Maybe you should just like turn your phone off tomorrow, or like put it in do not disturb mode or something. Just take 10 minutes of silence. It's amazing what some of that can do. And how much stimulation that we're getting from technology. So it's a good thing, right? But then it also is shaping us. One of my favorite quotes is from this guy named Marshall McLuhan, and he said this in the 60s, 70s. He said, we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. So, so we form these things to do something, to serve us, to make us more efficient. And then they suck all of our time out. But, with social media, it's like, I made this to help me. And it's now my greatest weakness.
Now it's leading me.
And now it's in charge. And it's like, so, the Bible talks about not being a slave to those things. And there's not an iPhone in the Bible, but I feel like you can apply that thought process of that I won't let this be my master, I won't let fame be my master, ultimately, because my security is in the love that God has for me. And so regardless of difficulty, regardless of what this sort of generational moment feels like, there is hope in that. So hopefully people were encouraged by that.
I hope so. I hope so.
So, man, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you guys for watching and for listening, engaging with us. We always want to hear your stories and hear, what's going on in your life. And maybe you have a question that you'd like us to talk about. We would love to do that. We have some exciting stuff coming down the pipe later on this year. So continue to watch these with us, subscribe, all that stuff. All the things that you do, add us to your list, and we'll try to be an encouragement to you in the technological soup that we find ourselves. We'll try to offer some encouragement. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time for another HF Conversation.